I just had a great session with Kevin Manion, Operations and Maintenance Head Honcho here at Greenwood Solutions. He also wears quite a few other hats, and one of them is making sure that we secure lots of C&I commercial solar work. What I really like about Kevin, and he showed that during this podcast, is his ability to actually listen, which is always a sign of a good leader, and his commitment to process and procedure. We talked on a wide range of subjects, including his growing up with Maltese parents in Broadmeadows, his love of anything mechanical, which led to an interest in hot cars. So yeah, we're talking V8s all the way, drag cars, the whole bit. Judo, martial arts, which he started when he was very young, approximately 7 years of age. Then he moved to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then finally boxing, which he's still involved in. We also looked at the O&M space, specifically solar farms, and also the addition of BESS, so that's battery energy storage systems. Every time I talk to Kevin, I learn something new, which is a delight to me, and hopefully you'll get a lot out of this particular podcast. So without further ado, let's get stuck into it.
So my introduction to Greenwood is because of Valley. So I entered into the solar space, or the renewable energy sector, as an electrician or a person who ran a business in the electrical contracting field, working in commercial construction. So building buildings and making them work, and had a passion to go into renewable just because it's the evolving electrical sector from a technical perspective, and I didn't understand it at all. So I ended up working for a company, in the renewable space, looking after the field activity because of my electrical background and my business background, and had no idea. The language was completely different. People were talking about inverters, and I didn't know what an inverter did. People were talking about PV, and I didn't know what it stood for. So I, with the help of Google, came across Valley and all of the introductory courses, and sat down and used them on a daily basis to learn about the PV market. So it's because of you, Valley, that I understand.
Oh, God. Yeah.
So I used your videos as a tool to learn, and then from there I found out about Greenwood, and coincidentally met Eddie. And then, the stars aligned, and here I am.
Everything happens for a reason, doesn't it?
Yeah,
You got to be philosophical about this kind of stuff in nature. You're looking at some videos, trying to work out what this whole renewable energy thing is, because it's electrical, but it is it's a sub.
So as an electrician, we electricity comes in from the field. It comes to a point of connection, and we do everything after that. So we make electricity. We use electricity to make it do different things. Run a pumps, which are light on, run an exhaust fan. We use electronics to control those devices. Whereas in the renewable space, we're pushing the electricity into the building. So it's on the other side of the fence. But we're making the electricity. So that was very different for me to understand that concept. I've come from a world where, I had to connect generators to a building, but it was always temporary. So the way you approached it was just to understand the capacity of the building, put a generator in and make it work for a short period of time, go back to a grid. Whereas now it's about how much can we generate over a footprint. So slightly different approach. So it's interesting being on the other side of the fence and learning about electricity. And I was a kid who left school to be an electrician.
Yeah, I want to ask about it. Obviously, when we were young, there's some people, you would have had friends who go, "I know what, I'm going to be a policeman when I'm 12 years old," and other people they're still 50 and I'm not sure, I've done a few things, I don't know, I'm not, where do I really fit in? Did you sort of understand that electricity was a thing for you pretty early on, or?
Yeah, I loved pulling things apart. I was curious. I was a curious kid, so I remember my parents buying me a tape deck when I was about 12 years old, And I took it out of the box and grabbed a screwdriver and pulled the back off it. And my parents are freaking out. Like, I hadn't even used it yet.
Wow.
I wanted to know how it worked before I used it.
Did you put it back together
Yeah,
again?
put it back together and
it
used
worked?
it, and it worked for the next 10, 20 years. And,
That's good.
so I think I've always been curious in that space, and then had a passion. I don't know why, but decided that to become an electrician. And once I had made that decision, my thought never wavered. I was about 13 or 14, and knew that I was going to become an electrician.
Wow, that's a real certainty at such a young age. You obviously have, by the sound of it, quite a, I'll use the word engineering kind of mind. Quite methodical about things.
Very much so. Yeah. So curious about how things work, why they work, what the tolerances are. So interested in mechanics. Played with cars as a teenager. Wanted to know what made them work. So it wasn't just about the combustion and the ratio of the gearbox and how it transferred to the diff and what the tyres did and how it propelled the vehicle, but also the electrics of it. So
wow.
So yeah, I find automotives one of those where it's all in one shell. So you get a little bit of everything. You get the electrics, you get the engineering, you get the physics, all in one capsule. So that's why I find vehicles so entertaining.
And if you get the right horsepower, you get the speed too.
Oh yeah, and then you enjoy the thrust. So yeah.
What was your first car?
My first car was an LJ Tirana.
Oh right, two-door.
Two-door.
Yep.
Yeah, full speed.
Yeah, wow. 186.
No, actually, it was small. It was only a 4-cylinder because that's all I could afford at the time. So they made a 4-cylinder in a British model.
Wow.
Similar to a Brabham engine.
Wow.
So I ended up with one of those. It lasted about 6 months. Put a 186 in that car.
Right.
And
kept the 4-speed, of course.
Changed the 4-speed. Yeah, had a bit of a play. So,
right.
So yeah, we mixed and matched. So
my sister had one, an orange one. I remember very clearly. Yep. Yeah. They were pretty like you see them now. They're a stylish looking car.
They're a good car.
They're a good car.
Yeah, they're a good car. Yeah.
And did you work? You obviously had that knowledge to work on engines and that passion.
Yep. So as a kid, there was a place not far from where I lived, which was a business called Total Performance, and they build race engines for drag cars and speedboats.
Wow.
And I was just a kid who hanged around the service station pretty much, and the chap there, Graham, took me in, and another chap, and taught us how to build engines. Well, he really used us as slave labour to pull things apart and clean the oily stuff.
Yeah, gotcha.
But at the same time, you learnt what the components are. So as you were cleaning, you learnt what that component is and how it fits to the next component. And then on the weekend, you got dragged into the engine room and you were responsible for helping the mechanic prep the engine and build the engine. And so, yeah, it was been an apprenticeship, so an unpaid apprenticeship, but it kept me off the streets and it was fun.
I'll hesitate here, but it's a little bit sad nowadays without those classic internal combustion engines where you could, if you knew what to do, you could tune your own carby, you could do your own service. There wasn't too much electronics and electric. There was a little bit, but there wasn't that much.
They were pure, all mechanical. So so in those days there was no. I remember the electronic distributor coming into the market, and everybody looking at the voltages we were getting out of electronic distributors was amazing. We were going from 1,500 to 2,000 volts to 22,000 volts overnight with one product.
Wow.
Good clean spark, better ignition, better explosion within the chamber.
Yep.
More horsepower, especially when you're talking about drag engines and using I can't think what it's called now. A jet fuel that we
methanol.
It was
avgas.
Avgas. Thank you. Yes, so it was an avgas fuel. So
wow.
Burns clean. Just good fun stuff about listening to the older guys, so the guys who are in the racing industry for a long time, understand how to get the best out of how to improve milliseconds on a racetrack.
It's a bit of it's knowledge and a bit of a black art, isn't it, with that fine tuning. Did you, as a security measure, or have friends who did this when you say parked at the pub or something? the old steering wheel locks, well, you know, they were pretty crap. Did you take the dizzy cap off? Yep. That's what you just put it in the pocket and walk in, and there's no way anyone's going to take the car unless they roll start it, you know, like as in they roll it away. I remember that very, very clearly. Did you progress to V8s at all?
Yeah. So I had a bit of fun in that space. So me personally, So my hobby car was a HD Ute with a small block Chev.
307.
So I had two engines. One was a 307 with what we call a stroker kit. So I had the capacity of a 350, and then I went to a 350. But my favourite engine by far is a 427 big block Chev, which is just, you know, for me the pinnacle. It is from an engineering perspective the best designed engines. You can do so much with it. Big and heavy, but the horsepower you could get out of those if you tuned them well was exceptional.
Why do you think certain engines, certain dimensions of engines work better? Like the 186 always seemed to work better than the 202. The 307 was always better than the 308. The 350 was probably better than 327.
Look, I think with anything there's a sweet spot. So obviously mechanical engineers or in those days, engine engineers, they've found the sweet spots, but then you've got to cater to the market from a budget perspective, and then you've got to cater to the vehicle design because some engine bays are smaller or bigger, or the front end suspension is a little bit different, so the engine has to sit a little bit differently in the on the front end.
So you had a 427 in one of your own cars?
Yep. No, so not in one of my cars. Right. So I crewed with it was like everybody was like in a team. So I crewed with a team that had a HQ with a 427 that was strictly a drag car. So I was involved with them for about 4 years.
Now, avgas, it's aviation fuel effectively, isn't it?
Yep.
And it's
jet fuel.
Jet fuel, so it's really high octane. And then you got the methanol burning cars, and then you got the nitrous ones, which so it's funny because now with we're moving to, full electric. A lot of people got hybrids. I got a hybrid. It's actually my wife's car. It's her car, and we're moving to electric. We're going to lose all those. In a way, it's I don't know.
I've progressed to an electric car, so it's a full electric car, and it's amazing. It drives completely different. It's a different vehicle. It's quiet, it's smooth all of the time. It's a bit sterile, but it's a better vehicle to drive. And because you don't have the big engine, less mechanical parts, less maintenance, goes for longer periods of time between intervals of servicing.
Yep. The centre of gravity's lower too.
Centre of gravity's lower.
They handle a bit better, don't they? Yeah.
The weight's in the bottom of the vehicle, so they're more stable. Just the next evolution of vehicles. That's all it is.
But they don't sound as good.
They don't sound as good as a V8.
This is the thing. There's certain sounds, like I'm not into motorcycles, at all. I mean, I admire them, right? But if I hear a Ducati, I just smile. I go, they sound good. And there's something about a particular sound that people brings back memories of when they were a kid, or they like that sound. I'm not a big fan of the sound of the Harleys because my dog freaks out every time he hears it. He's just
all very different. Different engines, just different engines. I keep knocking the table, so apologies for that.
No, that's all good.
Different engines, different sounds. The different engineering within the design of the engines. And you get those differences. But most of the time, if they're travelling up a road, you can pick the distinctive sounds of the different makes. Some of the Japanese bikes sound very similar.
Yes.
But most of the other bikes, whether it's an American bike or a European bike, or sound very, very different.
So you rode motorcycles as well?
I did.
Oh,
for a short period of time.
Wow.
So that was fun. But for me, I've got a bit of a white line fever where I can sit here and talk about safety all week, and then put my leathers and my helmet on and step onto the bike. And so for me, once I became a dad, it was a real obvious time in my life to say that I had other responsibilities and I needed to control that white line fever, and the only way to do that was to get rid of the bike.
Yeah, I've heard a few people who have gone down that road when they've become parents. I want to get a motorcycle license, and but my wife says, if you die, you're gonna. She goes, I don't care if you die, and she probably means it more times than not. But she says our children are still, they're not that old, 14 and a 20-year-old, and they'll miss you. And I went, okay, right. But I do want to get one because they look. There's a freedom with them, isn't there?
There is. There's no doubt. There's a freedom.
And you're in the moment. You got to be in the moment all the time.
You're right. You're on all the time. So it's a white line fever. So for me, once you're on that bike, I think about nothing else. I look for the gap, constantly trying to find that gap, and then the fun part about getting to the gap, and then sometimes you get through little spaces, and you use that as an excuse to say, I'm just trying to get to the gap.
Wow.
And the gap's about the safe zone, so I can get to that safe zone and then switch off for a little while. But you find that gap and then you're looking for the next gap. So you're zigzagging through the traffic or through the cars on a freeway to find that gap continuously. So for me, I use the excuse of finding the gap as the excuse to manoeuvre the bike to get the bike to do what it was designed to do.
Were you one of those naughty kids who had their motorcycle?
Never. Just a disclaimer.
Well, leave it at that. Yeah. What about your parents? Were they happy with you becoming an electrician? Did they push you in that particular way, or did they say, Kevin, we want you to study, we want you to go and do another thing, we want you to be maybe a mechanic, non-electrician, or what? Was there any expectations from them?
Bit of a funny story. So I never met my grandparents. My parents immigrated in 65, and so I never got to meet my grandparents. They passed before I ever got overseas. I got to Europe. And my parents never really influenced my decision. They encouraged anything that I wanted to do.
Wow.
Well.
That's great.
And so when I said I wanted to be an electrician, they just said, yep, great. And they'd come from a background where, they'd worked in factories. So for them, to progress into a trade was a step up. So they encouraged it, especially in Australia as a licensed trade. So they were pretty pleased. And anyway, after I got my apprenticeship, about 2 weeks in, they told me that my grandfather was an electrician, but they didn't want to tell me beforehand. So that was a real sort of, moment in my life where I sort of went, oh. And I'm glad they didn't tell me because it didn't influence my decision. So there you go. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Well, your parents were wise. They sound, that's a wise decision, I reckon.
Yeah, so they didn't want to influence my decision from their input. So that was pretty cool for me.
Now, obviously, you're interested in electrical stuff. You became an electrician. Love mechanical stuff. You got this engineering mind, and then for your hobby, you started. At what stage did you start, like boxing? And because we're going to talk about that.
We're going to talk about that.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Yeah.
So I went into combat sports at about the age of 7 or 8.
Wow.
Doing judo. There was a local club. I grew up in Broady, and I think it was my mum. I might have come home from school saying that something happened, and she said, right, you're going to learn how to defend yourself. There was a judo school around the corner. I went to a free class, and I left there about 6 years later.
Wow!
And progressed through the ranks, and so that was my introduction to combat sport, and loved it. I just I took to it like a duck to water.
What was it that you particularly liked about it?
I think the structure, the discipline, maybe my engineering brain at that point in time. The black and white, get the data, analyse it, execute it, and that's what combat sport is all about.
There's a lot of body mechanics in say jiu-jitsu and judo, isn't there?
Very much so. Yeah.
You really got to understand that if you want to be pretty good.
To the point where if you place your feet in a certain position and then turn your feet outwards, you get better stability. So yes, there's a lot of body mechanics / engineering in how you position yourself. You drop your knees, rotate a hip, how to get a throw, like an over the shoulder throw with somebody who's twice your weight, so it's all about the dynamics. So there's a lot of engineering and leverage and positioning that goes into that. But you do
wow.
it, and you have to do it within milliseconds. So it's
Well, this is the
millisecond
thing.
thought
It's
process.
timing too, isn't it?
Yeah, especially when you're in competition. So yeah.
So you were 6 years for judo,
Yep.
and what made you leave judo? You found something better, or
we moved suburbs, and after that I met a couple of other guys and found jiu-jitsu. So I did jiu-jitsu for a little while, and then met a mate who was doing boxing, and he was way fitter than me. And I grew up in an era where, the old legends, the heavyweight legends were, household names.
Yes.
Muhammad Ali,
Yep.
George Fraser, just to name a couple. But mums and dads, kids knew these names. So these were legends of a global scale.
they were?
So boxing was part of my growing up, part of my DNA. We would watch it on a Saturday night as a family. So
wow.
it was so pretty bizarre, and not just us, but a large cohort of the community watched the heavyweight titles. That's what we did. Growing up, and was free to air, and you watched a fight from Las Vegas, and all the razzmatazz that went with it. And these people were personalities at the same time, so they were showmen. So I was attracted to the sport, but when I met a friend who was boxing and realised how fit he was, I was attracted to the ability to get that fit.
Wow.
So I had my combat sport, judo, jiu-jitsu background, and then really went to boxing just purely because I wanted to get fitter.
Because they are fit. They're really fit.
Oh, it's no doubt. Yeah, it's in my mind. Because look, it's not about the endurance. So it's not about the longevity. Because there's two styles of boxing. One's the amateur style, which is the Olympic style, and the other one is the professional style. So very, very different types of boxing. Even though they run to a similar rules, the approach and the techniques that are used in both are very different.
Wow. That's interesting. I didn't realise that.
Yeah. So boxing from an amateur perspective, you're only boxing for 3 minutes per round, for 3 rounds.
Right.
In the professional, you're boxing for 3 minutes per round. Nowadays, up to 10 rounds, but historically up to 15 rounds.
15 rounds. I
So
remember.
it's a marathon. So it's
right.
like watching somebody on an athletics track running 100 or 400 meters versus somebody who's doing a marathon. So very different. So in those sports, very different running techniques. In the boxing sector, very different boxing techniques and approaches to
Would it
those.
be more in the professional, there'd be more technical boxers than, say, in the amateur boxers, because the amount of time, like the rounds, they're more rounds?
No, so with the boxing, it's more about the heavy hitting and the intent to knock the other person out because you want to stop the fight early. So, if you're going to have a fight for three rounds versus a fight for 10 rounds, I think I'd like to take the 3-round option.
Of course.
But in order to do that, you've got to execute early. And you can only do what your opponent allows you to do. As much as you try to dominate the fight or control the fight, there are certain limitations that your opponent is going to counter. So you have to continue to manoeuvre and work to every fight's different. So you can have a game plan on the day, wake up in the morning, feeling well, or you've got more energy than you thought. Your opponent might be in a similar or opposite situation. So every fight's different. You could fight the same opponent 3 times, and those 3 fights are very, very different. And
there's some people who have unnaturally fast reflexes in my experience.
Undoubtedly.
And they're if well trained, they're quite formidable. So, mate, like with your style, are you pretty fast, or when back then were you pretty fast, or you had average reflexes?
Average, yeah. I was a bum. I was a bit of a lazy athlete. So as much as I wanted to get fit, I didn't really want to become a competitive boxer as much as I enjoyed it. And I did have some fights, and they went my way, which I was pretty pleased about. But for me, it wasn't about longevity. For me, it was just about understanding the technique,
right?
And learning.
There's the engineering brain coming
Correct,
in. Yeah,
exactly,
wow.
Yeah. And all of these things were just not. I didn't know why I didn't want to compete, but I was very involved in boxing, and then just hung around the sport as as a spectator there for a little while. So involved in gyms and, you know, doing my own fitness and getting involved in clubs and different aspects. And, you know, the boxing world's a community, so you make a lot of friends and it's a pretty tight, because it's a small network, so it's a pretty tight network. And I was at the boxing one day and I'm sitting at the table scoring fights and a friend of mine said, you know, why don't you go and become a referee or a judge? And I went, nah, they won't need me. This is, and sort of sitting there thinking, I could actually enjoy that.
Wow. And so you became a judge, a referee?
Yeah, so I became I'm currently a registered boxing referee and judge in the amateur circuit. So my passion is the amateur boxing. So what we call Olympic style boxing. That's my passion. So I got involved in Boxing Victoria, became a judge. So you've got to do your time as a judge. Then you do some more training, you become a referee. And then I got involved in Boxing Victoria, got onto the committee, and spent a fair bit of time and ended up the president of Boxing Victoria there for a little while, and resigned from that role on the committee in February of this year. And now starting to realise how much time I put into it, because I seem to have a lot more time.
Wow.
But it was fun, and I'm still in touch with a lot of people from Boxing Victoria. And I'll probably go to my first event this year, this Sunday, because I purposely, when I resigned, I've purposely taken a step back from the events for two reasons. One, for my own sanity, because I wanted to have a break, and the other reason is to allow the new president and the new organisation to take control. Because if I was there, people would still continue to come and ask, you know, what about this, or can we do this, or so I've clearly made it, you know, had a timeline in there for the new people who have taken over the role to be able to do what they do.
It's funny, throughout history, there's always been, whoever you're talking about, there's always been a particular martial arts or way of fighting, even as far back as the Egyptians.
Yep.
And there's always been that combat aspect, and probably I reckon the appeal is that it's a true test of a particular aspect of the people involved. And of course, there's that protective aspect as well, you know. And now we're seeing, like, what's really popular is, you know, ultimate fighting, mixed martial arts, which is using a combination of all different techniques from all over the place. And they seem to be really, really fit.
Yes. Oh, without a doubt.
Would they be fitter, in your opinion, than boxers? Because they're using their legs as well.
Yeah, so boxers are more cardio fit. Right. Whereas anybody who's in the, let's call it the grappling space, so judo, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, they are cardio fit from a stamina perspective, because when you're using force, you know, using your muscles to move things around, that's a different fitness than cardio fitness, as if you're going for a run. And I don't know which parts of the body get better or worse in regards to lungs or heart or whatever, but it's a different cardio fitness.
But then you got those people who do the grappling and the kicking and the punching.
So now with mixed martial arts, those people are a combination of all combat sports. So yes, they are fitter as a whole. So if you have a boxer who could run 20 Ks, for example, just for warm-up, then the guys who are in the UFC space probably can't run 20 Ks, because, you know, they might be a 10K runner or a 15K runner. Right. But, you know, they've got the ability to do 500 push-ups, whereas the boxer can only do 200. Yeah. So different techniques for fitness.
It still seems that when it comes to striking, that they tend to use boxing techniques. You know, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, as opposed to, say, some of the more traditional martial arts that, and I won't include, say, karate and taekwondo in this. They do have some circular movements, but if you look more of the softer, I shouldn't say softer, but different, like some of the kung fu's have more circular movements, which obviously take longer to execute if you're talking about moving your fist from this point to that point, as opposed to a straight line. So it seems that this MMA is just taking the best bits of everything and putting it all together, isn't it?
So MMA started because, you know, somebody came up with an idea to say, if we had a boxer in a ring with somebody who does kung fu, who would win? and that's how it started.
Yeah.
So that's how MMA started, back in, I'm going to say probably 20, 25 years ago, probably more now I think about it.
I think it came from the kickboxing. It grew out of kickboxing a little bit, didn't it?
There was a combination where there was, boxing and then kickboxing, and then, just this evolution of, okay, how can we get another product out into the market to sell tickets for people to come and watch?
Yeah.
It's a business.
It's a massive business
it's a show,
too. Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah. Now, complete change of subjects, travel.
Yep.
Have you travelled? Have you been to Malta?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, look, I went to Malta as a 20-year-old kid with with a backpack and $100, with the ambition to meet family, because my parents immigrated here, and it was just me, my mum, my dad, my sister. So I got to the age of about 21, 22, and had this desire to meet family. So jumped on a plane and went to Malta and met family, and then found out about the history of Malta while I was there. So, fell in love with architecture. And I suppose I'd come from a construction background, lived in a country that was 200 years old, and we built everything with, machinery and cranes and, power tools. Went to a country that, had a building history of, 1,500 years.
Yeah, wow.
And in my mind, I'm thinking, how did they do that?
How did they build that?
And they're big and thick walls,
wow.
and all limestone buildings and beautifully crafted window sills, and that really appealed to me from a construction, maybe engineering background. I hadn't even thought about it. Just how did they build these buildings?
How did they? I mean, there's a lot of conjecture about how they all throughout history, these big buildings, how they actually built them. How do they get that precision? Some of the blocks we're talking huge, and mortar joins of like 5-10 mil. It's amazing stuff.
So how do they build it? Slowly. So, and that's the difference nowadays. We're not patient. We want to build it fast. So in order to build it fast, we've got to prefab it. We bring in the tools to erect it as quickly as possible. We've got better planning, better project management techniques. We have the benefit of history and hindsight compared to what they were doing 400 years ago, where they just built it slowly. So, they had time to go back and go, oh, actually, that's not right, so let's fix that. Or that windowsill needs a bit of more detail, so, let's spend a week working on that.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
Whereas what they did, what took them a week, we now do in an hour. And it's not about the look. It's about just the functionality. Get it done and move on.
Which is a little bit sad, because you can have form and function, I reckon.
Yeah.
But it comes at a price, and
Correct.
that's the thing. It's price driven and cost driven. Now, you're at Greenwood. You've got a position, and for the listeners, can you please explain what that position is, what you actually do, and why do you do it? There you go.
Well, there's a short answer. I don't know. So I'm. So I don't really. So I just do whatever Greenwood needs, really. At the end of the day, so my primary role is to look after the field activity in regards to the C&I and O&M space. However, based on experiences, my knowledge based on age and experience is broad. So I really get involved in lots of stuff.
So you wear a few hats.
I wear a few hats, yeah.
So can you explain what C&I is? Like for people who don't know. Yeah.
So commercial and industry. So commercial sites and industrial sites that require solar. So a commercial site is anything where a commercial building, so it's a non-residential site.
Right.
So it could be a factory used for storage in a commercial space, or it could be in industrial space where it's a factory that's manufacturing. So it covers all of the commercial. So it's really just commercial installations, rooftop solar.
And what about industrial?
Yeah, I don't know.
So that's the thing. Yeah, what's the difference? I don't know myself.
So historically in the electrical sector, so if you're an electrician doing work and you worked in the commercial space, you built commercial buildings. So offices in the city, apartments. So that's considered to be a commercial building. If you worked in the industrial sector, you worked in a food processing plant.
Right.
You're right. You don't do much talking. I've just realised. You're very good at doing that. It's just dawned on me after all those podcasts that I've watched of you that I'll watch them differently from here on in.
It's hard. I'll tell you, it's hard.
So the industry is more what you do within the building to produce a product.
Right.
So, you're working with robots, you're working with conveyor belts, you're working with machinery that manufactures. You might be working on ovens to make product. So that's where the terminology comes from. So you either worked in the commercial sector, building buildings, or you worked in the industry or industrial sector where you were more involved in the manufacturing plant. And so that's where the term C&I comes from.
Okay.
So nowadays it's more PV systems on commercial buildings.
But that's the thing, isn't it? It's different. Like we come in after the fact.
Yep.
We come in and augment to an existing structure, both physical structure and electrical structure, and we have to take all those things into consideration. Like, can you give, for example, with shutdowns, like say it's a big factory, you can't, and you're going to shut it down at 2:00 in the morning because you're going to do that final connection. You have to sometimes take into consideration, well, I might be halfway through an industrial cycle.
Yep.
Or it might be a bottling plant.
Correct.
There must be a lot of planning that goes into something like that, as opposed to, we don't. It's an engineering company. It's a commercial site, but we don't run at night. The only thing that's on is the burglar alarm and the fridges.
Yep.
It must be completely different.
So every site has its own complexity. Every single site. No site. The only sites that are similar, for example, is you might be working for Woolworths at a shopping centre, and then you might do the next one for Coles.
Right.
So they're similar. But the shopping centre is different to the apartment building, or
Yep.
the apartment building is very different to the manufacturing plant. So every site has its complexities. So the first thing we need to do is talk to the client, or nowadays we say the stakeholders,
Right.
and just say, at some point we need to do an isolation to your building
Yep.
in order for us to do the final connection, and that work will take 4 hours. What impact of 4 hours of no power have to your building?
Yep.
And so we just understand how they operate. So we either talk to the maintenance people or the facility people to understand what the complexity of these buildings are. A hospital, different scenario again.
So is it an education process as well from our perspective with our stakeholders?
Yeah, we need to understand their requirements in order for us to then pivot, because there's always a way to find that opportunity. There's always a window. I clearly remember a conversation I was having with NAB one time. We were doing one of the work in their data centre.
Wow.
We had to do an isolation. There's probably a half hour section of work that we needed to do, where we had to switch the board off to make the final connection. And I remember the chap saying to me, "You can't switch the power off. It's not an option to switch the power off."
And you said, we've got to switch it off.
So we've got to switch it off because I'm not in a position to kill any employees. They're not they're not disposable.
Absolutely.
And we have a moral and legal obligation to not go down that route.
That's
an
understatement.
So he was very adamant. We had to do this work live. That was the only option.
Oh my gosh.
So I said, cool, that's fine. Let's approach it with this in this manner. So I built out a work plan to do all of the work. Got quotations from the ambulance, Melbourne ambulance, had people on standby who were first aiders. All of this, built out this entire plan, and then went through it with them, did a 2.5 hour presentation and explained to them how we were going to do this live, and then asked them to sign the document, because it was them who would not allow me to, who was enforcing that we do this work live.
Did they sign it?
They found the half-hour window for us to switch the power off.
Of course they did.
And it was just,
Wow.
it was just a matter of, how to explain to that client, why we needed to switch the power off. And so for him, it was just, he understood his world and he was entrenched in his world. And in his world, the power had to stay on in order for his equipment to keep operating.
Yeah.
However, we had a need to do it as safely as possible. And And my approach to that was to educate him as to why we needed to do that. So we went a very, very long way to find a way to help him identify the importance of switching the power off.
It's about managing their expectations too. I mean, obviously with any commercial solar / BESS combination project, the client's taken that on because it's the most economically viable option at that point in time. And obviously they don't want a break in business for too long. But with those early conversations and, of course, managing their expectations, and they realise, yes, there is a point where we have to turn it off because you got to turn it off. There's no two ways about it.
So I'm going back 20 years ago where, we were just getting to the stage where don't work live.
Wow.
So now when you talk to clients about, needing to find a time to isolate, it's a very easy conversation, much easier conversation, because everybody accepts the fact that there are limitations and, we don't do that work anymore.
What's some of the major changes or the most important changes that you've seen in the last, and you've been doing this for 30, 35 years all up?
41.
That's right. You're nearly my age. Yeah, they're nearly, but not quite. Yeah, so, what's some of the major changes, both good and bad?
Look, the main things are the tools we use nowadays compared to the tools we used when I was in the process. Very, very different. The days of rolling out an extension lead to plug in a drill are gone. Every tool now is a power tool, a battery tool.
Yep.
That is a big difference.
That's a plus, isn't it?
It's a huge plus.
Yes.
The quality of our testers and our meters now, the things that we can measure now with a meter and get a result without doing a calculation is amazing.
Wow.
But also the approach from a safety perspective. Whereas now every time we start a job we think and talk about safety. Whereas in the past we only talked about safety when something went wrong. We probably should have done that better. So reactive as opposed to proactive. 40 years ago it was very reactive. 40 years later it's very proactive. And in 40 years' time it'll be different again. It's just part of the evolution. Having the ability or the pleasure of hindsight is a big plus.
Very, very true words. The whole renewable energy industry is a bit. I've always thought it a bit weird in a good way. Do you still find it strange that, like, these solar panels can collect the rays of the sun and then miraculously transform them into usable energy? To me, it's just, I still wake up going, this is weird. It's weird. Yeah. Weird in a good way.
It pisses me off because I can't pull it apart to see how it works. So yes, very much so. The first time I worked on a job where there was a solar panel broken, I took it home because I wanted to understand, but I had there was nothing I could pull apart to understand how it actually worked. Thanks to YouTube and the internet, I've got a better understanding about how we convert energy, or we convert sun to energy, but I can't pull it apart to look at it and see it and test it. So, but it is. It still blows my mind a little bit that we, that somebody was smart enough to find a product that converts light, sun, UV, to electricity. I think it's brilliant. And,
it is brilliant.
And and that concept alone was my passion to get into renewable.
Wow.
Because after 30 years or 35 years of being in the electrical industry, I still had this. There was this piece of me as the electrician who didn't understand how it worked. So that's how it all started.
I think too, unlike, I'll say, I hesitate to use this term, standard electrical work, renewable energy is changing. It changes so radically, so frequently, so quickly. It's not only new technologies coming out, panels improving, something now with battery storage, BESS, the whole BESS scenario, battery energy storage systems, and then the comms between them, the communications, the AI in a lot of cases that people are using. It's just, you close your eyes for a month and you go, oh, what's going on?
Yep. Well, there's definitely a shift in the renewable space now, looking at batteries and getting into the battery technology and understanding how batteries work. We haven't saturated. We're far from saturating the
long way
PV
off.
the PV market, but we have a much better understanding now. So we can make them bigger, we can make them bolder. We can make them do different things. We can tilt them and follow the sun and things that weren't happening 15, 20 years ago to the degree or as common as what it is now. Whereas you might have found a farm 20 years ago that was using that concept. Now every farm is using that concept. Using tilts and following the sun. Whereas now we're getting so good at generating that we have an excessive amount of electricity that we need to, develop the storage. And with battery technology getting better, getting cheaper, there's an economical drive to go into storage. And so that's the next phase.
It is. It's funny. Like the whole industry has really been driven by the price of electricity. When I started, panels were $10 a watt, right? And then later on, many years later, John Howard came out and $8,000 for rebate, and then it was a feed-in tariff. And you were saying to the domestic customers, don't use any power during the day. Feed it all back to the grid.
Correct.
Because you were getting 60 cents plus GST. And then that changed. And so our industry always has to adjust to the fact that, now we don't design a system with anything going to the grid because it's negligible. And
Correct.
by the year 2030, it'll be zero unless you have a special deal. And then hang on, we've got battery storage, you've got stuff like FCAS, arbitrage, consumption load profiles, and we're constantly adapting and changing our designs because of all this.
Yep, definitely.
It's crazy, but it's interesting.
It's exciting. I love the fact that it's evolving. And for me, that was the passion to get involved. I'm at the back end of my career, and I say that reluctantly because I do love it.
Join the club.
But to be involved in this new evolution of electricity is genuinely exciting for me. To watch this space evolve, where we're now generating, when I started, the concept of having a solar farm was not even a concept.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
now we've got farms scattered all over the country, and now we're talking about storing that energy and then switching it on and off remotely from a computer based on dollars or based on load.
Yep.
And that's really exciting. When you understand how the back end works.
But all these systems, right? They all need maintenance.
Yes.
And people tend to forget that. To me, that's the ugly child. So, for want of a better expression, but if you actually do some basic sums, which I've done, if you don't with soil panels that are soiled, strings that are broken on a solar farm or even a roof space, commercial or industrial, you're talking about the loss of a lot of income, aren't you? And that's so. Tell us, what's the standard kind of operation and maintenance schedule you'd have for, say, let's say it's a half a mega 500 kilowatt roof mount system. What do the guys under your control? Oh, sorry, not control, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
What do they do? Yeah, what do they do? Yeah.
So from an OEM perspective, it's funny. So in the rooftop solar space, we visit those sites every 6 months or every year, depending on what the client wants.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll talk to the client about the potential. So what we're there to prevent an outage. So we look at the connections, we look at what the system is doing. So we look for the telltale signs to identify if there's a point within the system that is failing. And you can have a look at the numbers to understand that there's a loss of generation. And then you've got to try and understand why there's a loss of generation. Is it over the entire site? Is it due to outside factors such as cloud and all that sort of stuff? Or is it specific to one string? So if it's specific to one string, then you go looking for the problem. Because last month it generated, let's call it a value of 10, and now it's generating a value of 8. Why? And generally it's going to be, a panel failing or a connection that's failed or failing. And so then you use your skills to be able to try to find, where that is. And, you might have to, open a circuit in the middle and test it one way and test it the other way. If when you test it to the right hand side of the open point, the value is going to be perfect. So you don't look any further. You then test to the left hand side of the open point, and the value should be different. So then you start looking for the failure point.
So we do maintenance on our own systems, obviously, but we have a whole suite of customers that we do maintenance for them. What's the most common problem that you've seen in your maintenance experience? I'd assume it'd be DC connections. Is that a big one? Or
yeah, for sure. And just a connection point that's failing. So
due to human error. How often
possibly,
is it?
Yeah, potentially. Somebody's crimped it. Somebody's crimped it, hasn't crimped well. Closed it up, or we've got product that is pre-manufactured, plugged it in, and there's a failing point. So at the time you test it, it's fine, but once it and what happens with electricity components that have electricity going through them is they expand and contract because of the electricity. So it gets hot, gets cold. Most of our products are exposed to the elements, so you get a 45-degree day, for a period of time, and then 6 months later you've got a minus one in the middle of the night.
Absolutely.
So these components are constantly expanding and contracting because that's what materials do when they heat up and when they're cooled down. They move. They have a tolerance, and so sometimes we have fatigue points within components that are constantly expanding and contracting. And sometimes that's the factor, or there's an issue where somebody's clipped a cable, and because we've got this constantly moving point with the compression of the clip, it's putting pressure on the cable and it pinches through the insulation.
Wow!
And then we get a dead short to earth.
Wow!
And we try to eliminate that by doing a different type of install.
Yeah, that's our installs, but we can't control our other customers' installs.
Correct, exactly, yeah. So, it's a workmanship. So it comes down to workmanship and understanding why, and it's an education. So, years ago, we installed cables in an X manner. We decided that we had a number of failure points, so now we install in a Y manner. And the regulations changed to suit. You can't put a cable, you can't cable tie a cable to the outside of a rail. It's got to go in the rail or on the cable tray, or so to give it that mechanical protection and to make sure you don't get that deterioration of that cable or cable joint.
I remember in the early days, a lot of people were with the DC cables really stretching the cables and making them all look so perfect, and there was like, oh my gosh, they're nice and straight. Little realising because of expansion and contraction, you're creating stress points, and you really have to have that little bit of that slack to allow for that, because there's thermal expansion in cables like there is in rail. Hence, maximum rail spans of maybe 25 metres depending on the manufacturer. So it's really important. Now, you must have seen some really good installs, and I'm not talking about our own. Ours are always good.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. But I'm talking about some of our other customers. You must have seen some really nice installs, and also, at the other end of the spectrum, some real crappy ones. Let's talk about the nice ones.
Look,
anything that stands out that the guys went, hey, wow, this is great. We need to do this on ours.
Lots. So most of the stuff that we get involved with now on a larger scale, the installations, whether they be ours or somebody else's, are of much better quality because the standards have evolved. There's especially in Victoria with the mandatory inspections from an independent inspector to come in and check the installation, and every label has to be on. So the quality of the work has become much better, especially at the higher end. So when you're doing installations that are 500 kilowatts and above, they're usually installed by companies who have a reasonable understanding of how the application should be put together. They've over the years before they've practiced on doing the residentials, and they've evolved to 100 kilowatts, and so
and they got up and up,
and the risk has got greater. The buildings are bigger, so there's a bigger risk from a safety perspective, how you approach the job. The methodology of the installation. Do you use a crane or a forklift, or all of those things that go into that makes you smarter, that makes you more aware that you must then introduce better installations, because it's not just getting an extension loader, jumping on a roof and fixing a panel. You're not just looking at 20 panels on a roof. You're looking at hundreds or thousands of panels on a roof. So do the job better, because the the ability to repair is harder because of the volume. So the quality. So there's no doubt the quality is better. And there's always going to be individuals or companies that take shortcuts. There's
Come
no
on,
doubt about
tell
it.
us about it. No, I'm not asking names. Just give
No.
us an example.
There are some installs where you hop up onto a roof and all the boys send you photos and you cringe. There's a cringe factor because moral for me it's all about the morals. So you promise a customer to install a product for X amount of dollars. Now they have no idea. They would not know the difference between a good installation and a bad installation. So what I keep saying to people is that the Australian standards are the minimum standards. And that is so important. I've complied to the standards.
Very true.
So that means you've done the installation to the minimum ability that you can provide. And then it's about the economics. So, okay, we want to go above the minimum standards. So we want to be better than what the standards tell us we need to be. However, economically, we've got to be competitive in the market. So it's about finding that balance.
You're dead right. It is about finding that balance. I think one thing from a design perspective is don't be stingy on the DC volt drop. I've always thought, the sun comes down, hits the panels, it's producing, and then you're allowing these huge losses in the cables before it actually hits the inverter. That's silly. It's that now they're saying recommended under 3, and it can't be over 5. And I know with our systems we always try to get under 2. Because you do the maths, and the savings can be massive. In other words, the extra energy going out because you haven't got this volt drop, massive volt drop in those DC cables.
Yeah, and one of the things that comes to mind, is when you're having conversations with people and they say, we've got to make the job cheaper, and we don't really need to make the job cheaper. We need to explain to the customer that they've got 2 options. They've got a cheap installation or they've got a quality installation. And it's no different to buying a car. You can buy a cheap car and it's going to get you from A to B every single time. But whilst you're driving that car, you're not going to have the privilege of electric windows or climate control or things like that. Or you can buy the expensive car and then have the luxury while you're driving. So it's not, you've just got to understand what the client's budget is and where their pitch point is and what they're trying to achieve. And sometimes it's not upselling. Sometimes it looks like we're selling fries with the burger, but it's not really upselling. It's giving the customer the awareness that there is a better option, and then let them decide based on their needs, their understandings, and their budget. So sometimes it's not about the price. Sometimes it's about the education, and take them along and give them the information in order for them to make a decision. And it's amazing. And I find that most times, most people go for the middle range or above. They never take the cheapest option. However, we have this psychology where, you've got to be the cheapest in order to win the work. Well, in order to be the cheapest to win the work, you've got to do the cheapest job. So you have to comply to the minimum standards.
That's it.
So sometimes it's about, taking the customer on that journey and explaining to them that, there are options.
I asked off camera, actually, Kevin, maintenance on a commercial industrial CNI kind of setup, roof mount, compared to, say, a solar farm, there'd be some difference. I mean, there'd be a lot of similarities, but there'd be some differences, wouldn't there?
Yeah, definitely. So we do a fair bit of maintenance on BESS sites, where there's a site where there's just a battery.
Wow.
And we do maintenance on solar farms, and we do maintenance on the CNI commercial space, what we call rooftop solar. So taking the rooftop solar out of the conversation, now just focusing on farms and BESS. The maintenance is similar. So we're looking for the same things. We're looking for anomalies. We're looking for hotspots. But now when we get into the farms, we're also looking at the vegetation. We're looking to make sure that nothing's moving, so none of the posts are moving. So make sure the structural integrity's there because we own that responsibility now. Whereas in the rooftop, we don't own the structural integrity of the building. That's
right.
That's
a really good point.
But we own that now because if things start to twist, then the trackers don't work properly. So the maintenance or the observations gets there's a little bit of a difference. And even just to include vegetation, so now we're looking at, plants and make sure they're being watered and make sure they're growing, and we're looking at there's lots of outside factors that we're not exposed to in the rooftop sector, because in the rooftop it's densely populated, whereas in the farms it's rural. And we had an example where we had a farm that for whatever reason at some point it started to get, the panels were getting dirty all of a sudden, and there was no. There were no dust storms, or there were no conditions that we could put a factor to. Coincidentally, talking to a farmer, and he's now ploughing a paddock that's directly adjacent to the to the solar farm,
right?
But he hadn't touched that plot of land for 2 years.
Oh wow!
And so now he's got a 5-year plan to plot that put vegetation through that paddock.
Wow.
And, so I started having a conversation, and he said, well, we don't always work on one paddock all of the time. We've got to let it rest and let the nutrients come back. And, he was talking a foreign language to me. Like, I don't know about nutrients in soil. Like, it's not part of my DNA or my understanding. So again, you just need to understand the people involved in the environment, or the stakeholders, to understand the operation or their application or what they do and the outside influences. So all we did in that regime is to, work with him to find out what his plans were, and that we pivoted our maintenance based on what he was doing. So the basic question was, are you going to be doing anything that's going to create a lot of dust? Yes, that's going to happen in, September and November, for example.
Because he's a stakeholder, isn't he? He's he's not a direct stakeholder, but he's classed as a stakeholder because he has an adjoining land.
Correct.
And what he does may affect. Well, it does affect.
It did affect. Correct.
Yeah.
So then we just pivoted and changed our maintenance schedule for to work around him, because there's no use going to check the quality of the panels or the dust factor or any of that. The week before he does his work, we're better off going 2 weeks after he's finished. And we might have a situation where he'll do his work, it'll rain, and we'll never see a problem. But at that time of the year, he does his work and he prays for rain. But if the rain hasn't come, that means the panels are still dirty.
Wow!
So there's little things like that. So we've learnt along the way.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So again, hindsight.
Hindsight.
Yeah.
It's the best thing. Yeah. The guys must love doing the farms. For one reason I can think of, like when you're working on a roof, there's always a tension. I don't care how flat the roof is. You're up 13, 14, 15 metres on a commercial roof. There's tension there. There's wind to take into consideration. Your body's always a little bit more compared to walking on terra firma doing.
In a way, the funny part is that, for 6 months of the year when you're walking around a farm, they're bloody cold. The wind's cold. And so it's funny because, last week I was on a job where we had a problem, and so, I was out on a farm at 10 o'clock at night to try and create a scenario to see if it was, we're trying to find a problem that we couldn't find the smoke and barrel. So we, so we went out and did some testing in the daytime and at night time. The reason why we're looking at night time, we know the farm's not generating, but we're finding problems in our data. So we wanted to be there live to see it. And 2 days later, I'm feeling all tense in my shoulders and all that sort of stuff. And I was talking to a couple of the other fellas, and they're saying the same thing. It was so cold that we're
the body was freezing.
So the environment and the elements have their take an effect on your body and your mindset and how you think things through and what you're doing at the time. So whether you're standing on a roof or in a paddock, you just deal with the elements. You just psychologically do it without even thinking. It's just inherent. You just get on with what you focus on what you're doing, and the elements are part of you react to it or you adjust to it, but you do it without even thinking. It's just you sort of go into autopilot.
That's a really good point about the elements, because when you think about it, nearly all, if not all, solar farms are in inland areas. Obviously, they have high solar irradiation. They're bloody hot in summer, and they're bloody cold in winter.
Yep.
So you've got that to contend with, let alone the installation side of things, but even from a maintenance perspective. Now, with the maintenance, how much monitoring's involved as part of this overall maintenance schedule?
Yeah, so a lot of them are very different. So we're in a privileged position where our farms are monitored continuously. So the farms that we're involved with are continuously monitored. And if something goes wrong, there's emails or SMSs that trigger through to various people. And then we have a triaging system. So we're like a bit of a frontline or an emergency response unit that, then identifies whether it's a small, medium or high outage, and then we just react accordingly. So luckily now with technology we can do a lot of that remotely, jump on a computer. We've got people who are very tech savvy who can read the front end and then get into the back end to do what they need to do.
Yep.
So I'm glad they exist within the team because I'm more
great.
front end.
Yep.
And then we just do a diagnostic and then collectively we come together to determine the next course of action.
What about the best systems when we start seeing more of these solar farms adopting BESS? That adds another level of complexity because the maintenance regime and the approach will be different for a BESS system than the solar, because you've got this concentrated energy source in these cabinets and so much electronics and a lot more things to go wrong, it seems.
Yeah, so the good part with the BESS units is that they the manufacturers have put a lot of equipment in there to monitor and identify where a problem is.
Right.
Excuse me, very early. So they nearly self-manage or self-maintain or self-monitor, but there's still that human element to go there to do the 3 monthly inspections, just to do thermographing of the larger components, even some of the smaller components, thermographing of the batteries to try and identify points of failure, just due to electricity. So the good thing for us is that when things are going bad in electricity, they get hot. So it's up to us to identify before they get too hot and fail. And the privilege or the benefit for us is that we used thermographic equipment to look at hotspots to make sure that it's working, or we're looking for the failure points and using thermography to assist us to to find that hotspot.
Yeah, thermography is amazingly effective, isn't it? Even I know in some cities and the apartment buildings in the city, the insurance rates are less if they've had a thermographic scan once a year on the main switchboard and the subboards, just to see that everything's hunky-dory. Because as you said, things contract and expand and things loosen off and hot points can develop, and we can't see it with the naked eye. We only realise it unless we've done a thermographic scan. We only realise it when there's an issue, don't we? So that's why this maintenance, it's sort of like it's hidden, and if you've done the maintenance correctly, everything's okay. And that's the thing; it doesn't have the
bells.
Better. It's
better.
That's what I mean. Yeah, it's better. Yeah.
So, and I suppose if you've got a car and you don't get it serviced, it's going to stop. It's going to break down because a component is going to fail.
Yes.
And the vehicle will stop moving. So most systems, whether they be a building or whether they be a solar farm or a BESS unit, if you maintain them and you look after them and you check them, you're going to find that failure point early before it stops. So you find the components that are failing rather than failed. Because if it's failed, you've not done your preventative maintenance.
That's it. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. Now, the guys that we've got under your direction doing the operations and maintenance, I'd assume they have to be pretty all attention to detail kind of dudes, wouldn't they?
Yeah. Very much. Yeah.
Because you're not, if you're not like that, that's not for you, isn't
Correct.
it?
Yeah. So look, even electricians, I've always said that there are different types of electricians. There are installers. And in a broad term, we say, the people who install the cable jerkers. So they'll do the installations. Then there are people who are more technical and involved in the commissioning. And then there are people who don't really want to get into commissioning, but they want to do the preventative maintenance. It's a little bit easier. It's not as heavy technical. So there's this real balance, and it's based on personalities.
Yep.
So you're either an installer or a tech. And they're very, very different people, just in their personalities, their DNA, their conversations, their mannerisms, their likes, their dislikes, different type of people.
So I suppose this leads me to the question, and I'm addressing this to you specifically, what makes a good leader? Like when you are leading people and with people, and everyone's a little bit different, but in the case of, say, the operation maintenance team, they're all, let's say, attention to detail kind of dudes,
Yep.
but they're all different as well. What sort of skills, what are good leadership skills? What makes a good leader? Or what makes you a good leader?
I don't know. There's different leadership styles, so I don't think there's any one type of leadership.
What about we'll talk about
so
your
for me, I'm a listener.
Yep.
I listen, I evaluate, I discuss. We set a plan, we execute. That's it. It's as basic as that. So I'm no expert. I have an understanding, but there are other people who have better expertise than me. So I seek their advice. So we identify what the problem is. I seek their advice to understand what the problems could be. We come together collectively to say, the pros and cons as how we, what's the rectification method, and then we execute that plan, and we don't deviate from the plan.
Right.
So once we have a plan, we don't deviate. That's crucial, because if we deviate, then we're looking for something else, because after we fix it, then we have to monitor it to make sure it's doing what it's doing. If we've deviated from the plan, the data that we're looking at is going to be different. So once we make a plan, we've got to stick to that plan. And I'm not saying that, so once we get out to site to do what we've got to do, if we identify a different problem, then the plan changes. But we need to understand what the plan is. So yes, the plan has some movement and flexibility, because every circumstance is different, and we get out to site and we go, actually it's not X that failed, it's Y that failed, and if we do this, we can fix it now while we're here.
So you're process and procedure driven in that respect.
Yep.
Yeah, and and some people are naturally like that, aren't they?
Yeah.
But others are not.
Correct.
Case in point, I never was, and I found out the hard way, and now I am because I've forced myself.
But I suppose this is hindsight. I've had 40 years. I was the kid who jerked a cable, and learned how to be an electrician, and then was genuinely interested in pulling things apart. So because of that, I went to the maintenance and service side of things rather than the installation side of things. But and understood that if I went to fix a machine as a tech, I never spoke to the business owner. I spoke to the person who operated the machine, because the business owner will say, that machine does X, Y, and Z, and he walks away, and then the operator will say, the machine doesn't do that.
Classic.
The machine does this.
Yeah.
He thinks it does that because when he bought it 15 years ago, that's what it did, but we've adjusted over time.
Wow.
And so now so that's why it's always important to talk to the operators or the stakeholders to understand, what the functionality is, so that you're not looking for a problem that doesn't exist. So I've learnt to ask and listen and then evaluate.
So you understand people. I mean, I'm not making that as a flippant statement, but I think to be a good leader, you do need to understand what drives people. And I was going to ask, doing martial arts, you would have learnt a lot of techniques that you're probably applying in your day-to-day life, especially, in your professional life. Sometimes I think about that. Look, discipline. There's no doubt. In the sports and when getting close to competition, you set a plan in order to get fit, to lose weight, so that when you jump on the scales, you've got a plan to get onto the scales and you're a certain weight, and then after you get onto the scales, that's stage one. After you get off the scales, stage two is once you jump through the ropes or onto the mat, what's the game plan, because you've done the research on your competitor. So you execute the plan. So I suppose that's always been part of my life, and I've just evolved in that circle. And I think we're birds of a feather. So you flock to environments, you find something that suits you as an individual, and you just live in that space while you're enjoying it. I love the saying of birds of a feather flock together. There's no truer statement, I think. And what about empathy? You obviously, if you're dealing with people, you have to have a certain level of empathy if you want them to do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, and now because of vintage, because of my age, I'm more empathetic, and being a parent, you're more patient.
Yeah,
because,
definitely.
But if you asked me this question when I was 35 years ago, 35 years of age, the answer would have been very different.
Yes.
And the vocabulary would have been very different. There would have been different acronyms in the conversation, and the approach would have been very different. But again, hindsight, and having the ability to draw on experience. And I've been lucky enough to be exposed to a lot of different people who have provided their hindsight or their wisdom, and people who've taken me under their wing and educated me from a leadership perspective. And now it's my turn to do that for other people, which is fun.
It's all part of that going back thousands of years, the apprentice-master relationship, isn't it? Like, the apprentice is there to learn, the master's there to impart information, and at the same time, there's a job to be done, and there's a balancing act there. I'll ask you a pretty interesting question here. Are leaders born, or can you make someone who doesn't have leadership qualities a good leader?
Good question.
Yeah, it is.
Look, I think if you're, I think where everybody is, there's two parts to all of us. Our DNA and our environment. And sometimes there's a synergy on your DNA versus your environment. So, if you're born into a very wealthy family who's and you watch your father who's a CEO of a business or owns their own businesses, those people are there's a DNA factor and there's an environment factor. But there are many people that have come from poorer backgrounds who have become great leaders. So, in their case, it was, ambition and DNA and the way they were born. But they only learnt it because their environment changed along the way, and they learnt different skills that they would never have learnt if they stayed in that same environment. So they sought different people in their life to learn different experiences, and whether it be through school or tertiary education or whether it just be through practical application, and going out of their way to find different people or, join a committee or a society or something, that's all part of it. So, the environment has a big part. There's no doubt in my mind.
It does.
That the environment that people are exposed to,
true,
it plays a big part of where you end up in life.
It's a funny one because I think the environment does play a role, but I think it's nature. I think there's certain people who have a propensity to do certain things, who are better at doing this thing than that thing. And there is a bit of a myth in amongst like management to try to get people to become, managers, and they don't have it in them. Doesn't matter what weekend retreat you do to do all this group stuff, blah, blah, blah. You cannot make someone who intrinsically doesn't want to do that, and it's not in them to do those things.
Right. Yep.
And I think the key is to identify in people what their capabilities are, and at the same time identify them in yourself to go, this person's better doing this. I can see that from experience and whatever. I'm not going to push them because it'll be counterproductive to the whole business or whatever.
Good. Round peg in a square hole.
Correct.
It's
correct.
So you put
it doesn't matter about wealth or how.
So that environment. So that I'm just when I use that sort of explanation, it's about the environment, just to sort of depict the environment. It's got nothing to do with money. It's that part of it, that DNA or that personality, exists regardless of the environment.
That's it.
So that's 50%.
That's it.
The environment is the other. And it might be a 60-40 or a 70-30 split. But, for the sake of the conversation, it's a 50-50 split.
Yep.
DNA, environment,
It's a podcast in itself, Kevin. Every time.
Yeah, it is. Exactly. And I can't believe we've talked about everything else but electrical. So we touched on.
We've talked a little bit. And I wanted to, so on that note, we'll talk about, you used to have your own business.
I did.
Tell us about that. Tell us a bit about that.
So the business was electrical. I owned an electrical contracting company. And we did a lot of work in what we call the BMS space, the building management system. So using computers to manage the climate within the building, so air conditioning controls.
Yeah, wow.
So there are other companies that installed the air conditioning, so they're the mechanical contractors, and we were the mechanical and electrical contractor that made the machine work. So they would install an air conditioner, and then we installed the smarts to make it happen. And that was a big focus. That was 90% of our business. And then on the back of that, there was the maintenance for some of that equipment. But yeah, that was a business. So we ran with a business partner, still a very good friend of mine. We ran that for 20 years, and I sold that in 2019, just before COVID. So
your timing was impeccable.
It was impeccable, yeah, because I didn't need the stress of
amazing.
being a business owner in that period. So I was very, very lucky.
And how important would you say that relationships are in business?
Oh, immensely, without a doubt. Building a network of people makes your life easier. To know, and again, it's about the individual's ability to do things, or the individual or the companies to be able to perform a task. So you work closely in building that network of from supply chain to delivery, and everybody in between is important in order to execute. You have the concept, you build the plan, you execute the plan, but in order to do that, you need a network of people or companies to deliver the outcome.
It's so interesting. I 100% agree with you, and I always have. And I bring it down to some really basic stuff. Yes, obviously money plays a role. We want to get the best deal, but God forbid you want to do business with people you can't stand just for the sake of shaving a few cents off.
Correct.
The long-term advantages of doing business with people that you have a good relationship is that you have loyalty, you have people doing things on time. You may have to pay a little bit more sometimes, but in the end, it works a lot better.
Yep.
It's because at the end of the day, we don't live by ourselves in isolation. We're group animals. We're herd animals. We want other people around us, and we want to be connected to them.
Yeah.
So, and especially in this industry, because everyone bloody knows everyone else. It's very small. It still is a very small industry.
Yeah. And look, but you need your supplier to make money, because if your supplier goes broke, then you're looking for another supplier.
Correct,
So there's a lot of energy involved in finding the right supplier.
Correct.
So you need your supplier to make money. You need subcontractors to make money. You need your employees to make money.
That's right.
And I always say that repeat business is easy business. So if you repeat what works, the third time, the fourth time, the fifth time, you have efficiencies, which then increases profit. So you try to repeat what works well.
Absolutely. I mean, what you're doing now, like in the operation and maintenance, is the perfect example of maintaining a relationship. It's not like we're just going to go and put some solar on and we'll never see you again. No, it is ongoing, ideally for X amount of years.
20 years.
20 years, exactly.
Yeah, that's the intent. I mean, people aren't investing this sort of money into solar farms because because they're in for the long haul, or they're in for the build and the sell. That exists. Because at the end of the day, these farms are a business. So they're either building to with the intent to sell to make money, or they're building with the intent to grow, just to grow profits over a long period of time, or to build a business that runs itself over a period of time. So and it's handy to understand what the intent is of the stakeholder, because then you work with them to deliver whatever their outcome is.
Exactly.
So yes, it's about again, talking to the stakeholders, understanding the stakeholders, coming up with a plan, execute the plan,
understanding their drivers. That's
exactly.
Understanding what actually drives them.
I'm just going to take my jumper off.
No, it is a bit warm in here.
This is important.
It is.
Well, semi-important. Important for me.
What, to take your jumper off? No. What do you mean? I'm missing something here.
You are missing something.
Oh, you've got. What's that? Oh, no, Jesus! You can look at this.
And this is the reason why I'm at Greenwood.
Of all the things
this
I
is the
thought-
reason why I'm at Greenwood is because of the podcasts and the videos that you've done.
Of all the things that you could have on your t-shirt, shit. Bloody get you burned that.
So I need you to sign it for me.
Oh no!
So there you go.
You're a bastard. Oh my gosh!
Welcome to Greenwood. Now it's my turn to ask the questions. So Valley, tell me about how you got into podcasts.
Oh mate, please no, I'm not. Oh, you're throwing me completely. You know, absolutely. Oh, I got to stop laughing. All right, so we're here with Kevin, and we're just sort of towards the tail end of the podcast, and only because we've talked for a heck of a long time. Now, if there was anyone looking to do your kind of job, what 3 attributes would you say, if there's 3, that you got to have to do it? Like, or you should have? No, you got it.
To do my job.
Yeah, to do your jobs, yeah.
Look, patience and the ability to listen. Because sometimes somebody, might have had a bad day or a bad weekend, or there's something else going on in their life, and they're trying to articulate something to you about a problem on site. But for whatever reason, it's bigger than Ben-Hur. And so sometimes you've got to analyse and understand, what's happening in that person's life, because, the problem's fairly minor, but the way they're just detailing it, it sounds like a big problem. So it's about, listen and be patient, and then go through the process and either talk them down or try to focus and, keep the conversation focused on the problem we're trying to fix. Rather than, so once, and that's part of the planning stage. So we get into that planning stage, then we can execute. After that, then you have a conversation of why were we in this situation? So there's 2 conversations. So I think, one of the things, the question is, what attributes? Be patient and listen.
Wow.
All of the time. And it's funny because when there's no problem, so if somebody rings me up and says, okay, we've got this problem on site, and it's just a general conversation, there's no problem to fix. We've had the conversation, we've executed, we've got a plan, we execute. So there's no further detail or there's no further follow up. It's only those rare occasions where you might put a note in your diary to sort of say, this problem should take about an hour or 2 to fix. I'll call Bob back in an hour or 2 and just make sure he's okay or she's okay. Yeah. So listen and be patient is probably 2 key things for people who are in a senior position where they need to, be doing not just with their staff but with people that they associate with.
Oh, I'm going to add the 3rd one. You may agree with me or not, but I've seen it in you, is the ability to quickly get to the crux of the problem without the superfluous crap. And I say that because I've had conversations with you where I've gone all over and you brought me right back, and I've gone, my God, what a skill. He's 100% right.
So I suppose for me, it's all about the, let's get to the point where we understand the problem. Let's put a plan together, and then let's not deviate from the plan. So how do we not do that? And let's stick to the conversation. And that's really important. And then once you've got to that point, fine, let's deviate and let's have other conversations to make sure that the plan's correct. But and I find that in conversations, and it pisses my wife off to the nth degree. So what might be an asset in one environment, is a detriment to the other environment.
I know what you're saying.
Because they're often where my wife would say, it's not just a black and white situation. And I go, why not? Why isn't it a black and white situation? Because it really is. But then I've taken the emotion out of it, and I've gone into my engineering brain.
Yeah, you can't do that with your wife.
Sometimes, there are failings, and sometimes you've got to pull yourself in and out of certain environments, and think about the people you're talking to.
There has to be a certain amount of agility, especially when it comes to personal relationships. And I think men in a married situation have to remind themselves that just because you think a certain way doesn't mean your partner. I'm a problem solver. My wife will say this and I'll go, oh, but you do this. They don't want to hear that. They do not want to hear that at all.
And the reason why most marriages fail in the first 20 years is because it takes men 20 years to understand that. So, and you're exactly right, because it's in our DNA to want to be the provider, to want to be the protector, to want to be the problem solver. And then, with hindsight, you get to a stage in your life where you go,
yep,
I've been wrong for the last 20 years and now I've got to make good the next 20 years.
Never a true word. Now, food. We both like food. We've talked about food off camera a few times, and it's one of the joys in life. And what Maltese food? I've never had it. You obviously enjoy Maltese food, or
yeah.
What's your go-to dish? And explain it to me,
please. Rabbit stew.
Wow,
is my favourite, and all it is just a gravy or a stew, a sauce, a pasta sauce that you have either on its own or with pasta. I love it with pasta because I'm addicted to carbs, and it's just something that simmers away for hours and hours. So the smell lingers in the house for half a day, and so it's about once mealtime is there, that those memories of the food cooking, the conversations while you're cutting up all the veggies or whatever else, or getting it all ready, and then you sit at the table and enjoy the meal, and if it tastes great, there's a bonus.
Vegetarians, close your ears for a second. I grew up on rabbit stew. We were very poor. Dad used to shoot them.
Yep.
Mum used to make a stew, but it was like a potatoes. It was like a bit of a Serbian dish.
Yep.
And I remember the rabbit, the flesh was white and hardly any fat, and it was really like firm and very tasty.
Yep.
Vegetarians, you can open your ears now. No, food is it's one of those wonderful things. Now, moving quickly from food, but because we could talk about food.
Yeah, we could. Yeah.
Favorite tool in the ute.
I was a kid who grew up with extension leads, so anything that's got a battery.
Love it.
Yeah, and a good tester. And I've always said to apprentices when they come and ask me what tools should they buy, I always tell them not to skimp on the multimeter that they're going to use to test the product.
Right.
Because it's the product that's going to save their life.
Yes.
So if you're testing a PowerPoint, you want to make sure that meter is working. And if you buy the cheapest meter, it has a higher rate of failure. Possibly.
That makes sense.
So if it's going to protect your life, spend the money on a meter and have a good meter.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So for me, a battery tool and a good meter.
Nice. And some final words just on, I suppose, the whole renewable energy sector, how you feel about it, just some parting words, Kevin. Yes.
Watch this space. It's the renewable energy sector is not over. If you start talking about hydrogen and all of the other aspects that people are starting to talk about, what fuel source are we going to use to generate electricity in 20, 30 years in order to stay in the clean energy space? And there are positives to nuclear energy, there are positives to hydrogen energy, there are positives to all of these things. I don't know. I don't think we really know the answer yet. So for me, it's a very much watch this space over the next 20, 30 years.
Nice words. Look, it's been a pleasure. I always learn something when I talk to you, always. Thanks so much for spending however long we've been here. And cheers very much, Kevin. Thanks, man.
And thank you to you, because before I met or saw you on a podcast, I knew nothing about renewable energy. So thank you.
Oh, that bloody makes me happy, because thanks very much. That's great.